New setup? Who dis? Hey guys, Brandon Zerby here to answer the question, should you be gluten-free? It turns out that about 10 to 20% of the United States population is now sensitive to gluten. More and more people are turning to a gluten-free diet, and they're feeling better as a result. But gluten is just a protein that's found in wheat, barley, and rye, and products that contain wheat, barley, and rye, such as pancakes, crackers, bread, cookies, and beer. But the thing is, most people aren't consuming gluten in its whole grain form by consuming wheat, barley, and rye. They're consuming these highly processed foods that we know are extremely unhealthy. So when people go gluten-free and they start cutting out these highly processed foods, they feel better as a result. And it makes sense why that would happen. But it turns out that the longer you stay on a gluten-free diet, the more you realize that there are gluten-free cookies, gluten-free pancakes, and gluten-free beer. And so people start to transition back to this highly processed diet that's now gluten-free. And they end up feeling worse than when they started. So that begs the question, is gluten the problem? Who do we know for a fact should not be consuming gluten? And if you think you're sensitive to gluten, should you cut back? Or, plot twist, double down? Well, I have lots of information today, most of it coming from leading gastroenterologist Dr. B's book, Fiber Fueled. So let's get into it. Let's start off by saying that only about 2% of the United States population should not be consuming gluten. That's not a lot of people. So here's how that 2% breaks down. First, let's start off with celiac disease. Back in 1995, about 0.02% of the United States population, which is 1 in about 5,000 people, was diagnosed with celiac disease. Today, that number has risen drastically to about 1%, which is 1 in every 100 people. And like most diseases, this is probably the cause of poor lifestyle and poor environmental factors that cause that. But either way, people with celiac disease, we know for a fact should not be consuming gluten. So how do you know if you have celiac disease? Well, in such cases, those who consume gluten will have an immune response that damages their intestines, causing symptoms like diarrhea, bloating, gas, or weight loss. And if you have any of these symptoms, you can go get tested by taking an upper endoscopy of the small intestine. And you'll have to run all this by your doctor, but most likely they're gonna have you consume 4 to 6 slices of bread per day for about 4 weeks before the test so that the answers come out pretty clear. And testing for this is near 100% accurate, so you're gonna find out right away if you have celiac disease or not. And those with celiac disease should not be consuming gluten. Second, we have a condition that's not necessarily related to gluten, but is related to other proteins found within wheat. And that's a wheat allergy that affects about 0.5% of the US population. And while it's pretty difficult to test for a wheat allergy, the symptoms should be fairly obvious. If you consume wheat and you start have swelling of the lips and tongue and throat, and you start having difficulty breathing, you're breaking out in hives, it should be pretty obvious that you have a wheat allergy. And those with wheat allergies should not be consuming wheat, but probably could consume barley and rye just fine. And I should add that you usually develop a wheat allergy as a kid and not necessarily as an adult. And the third and final group are people with gluten sensitivities that have extraintestinal symptoms that make up about the remaining 0.5% of the US population that should not consume gluten. So if you consume gluten and you start having symptoms that are outside of the intestinal tract, that's the key here, such as joint pain, muscle pain, limb numbness, altered mental state, loss of balance, any of these symptoms after consuming gluten that are outside of the intestinal tract, that's when you should probably avoid gluten. But again, this doesn't affect a lot of people. It's about 1 in 200 people. And if you are part of this group, you should not be consuming gluten. So what should these groups of people eat instead? To summarize, people with celiac disease, a wheat allergy, or gluten sensitivities with extraintestinal symptoms should not be consuming gluten. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be consuming whole grains. Consumption of whole grains are linked to a host of healthy benefits, such as improved cardiovascular health, weight loss, and lowered cholesterol. So instead, these people should load up on gluten-free whole grains, such as quinoa, buckwheat, sorghum, or millet. Millet I absolutely love. It's such a versatile grain that you can just throw in any dishes, and yeah, it's great. So load up on these healthy whole grains that are gluten-free. And the last thing that I'll mention is if you do have a gluten sensitivity, it can be useful to test that sensitivity yearly, as it's possible that some people end up growing out of these sensitivities. So next, let's cover the remaining 98% of the population that should be consuming gluten. So wheat, barley, and rye are health-promoting foods. Consumption of these foods actually increases the diversity of your gut bacteria, and they're filled with fiber, vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and antioxidants. They're pretty good foods. And in fact, studies have shown that people who go gluten-free in the general population not only have no health benefits, but actually have health detriments because they're not consuming these healthy whole foods. So that's why I recommend for the general population to eat wheat, barley, and rye, keep gluten in your diet in its organic whole food form. But let's touch on about 15% of the US population that has a gluten sensitivity that's within the digestive tract. So if you don't have celiac disease, a wheat allergy, or gluten sensitivity with extraintestinal symptoms, it's possible you still could have a sensitivity to gluten that's just shown within symptoms of the digestive tract. So after consuming gluten, you may notice that you have bloating, constipation, diarrhea, abdominal pain, symptoms within the digestive tract. And when you remove gluten from your diet, these symptoms end up going away and you feel better as a result. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be eating gluten. That just means that your gut isn't well equipped to digest gluten. So instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, let's stick to Joe Biden's mantra of build back better for our gut. And once we do that and we create a robust gut, we'll be able to chew through gluten like Trump chewed through cabinet members. So how can that remaining 15% of the population, which has a gluten sensitivity that's only inside of the digestive tract, create a more robust gut? Well, plant scientist Bob Quinn has 4 main suggestions. And while each of these suggestions are really useful on their own, when you combine all 4 at once, you get optimal results. So number 1, eat ancient heirloom grains. Studies have shown that these grains can be a lot more nutrient dense than modern versions of wheat, barley, and rye. And a number of studies have also shown that consuming these ancient grains actually have a lot of benefits to the digestive tract. So examples of this would be farro, spelt, and kamut. Number 2, go organic. This reduces the chances for there being some sort of chemical residue on the grains which can cause these digestive symptoms. And going organic is just an all-around great practice, not only for gluten sensitivities, but just for your general health. Number 3, eat whole grains. Eating grains in their whole food form compared to these processed and enriched grains are really going to help out the gut. These whole grains are going to help create a more diverse and stronger gut bacteria that's going to allow you to digest gluten a lot easier. And finally 4, try sourdough bread. Sourdough bread takes about 6 times longer to make than typical bread. And during this long process, the fermentation process destroys about 90% of the gluten. So eating sourdough bread puts less of a gluten stress on your body, and it's going to make it easier to go back to gluten-containing foods, and it's going to make that transition a lot easier. So here are my final thoughts. Whole foods such as wheat, barley, and rye, consumed in their whole food form, are health-promoting foods. They have tons of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and phytochemicals that lead to a healthier lifestyle. But if you do have celiac disease, a wheat allergy, or a gluten sensitivity with extraintestinal symptoms, you should not be consuming gluten. Now, if you have a gluten sensitivity with digestive symptoms only, then you should be looking to build a stronger, more robust gut so you can be consuming gluten. And this is done by eating organic, whole, ancient grains with a side of sourdough bread. And no matter your situation, we should all be trying to avoid these highly processed, gluten-containing foods like cookies, cakes, pancakes, and muffins. All of this will lead to both a healthier and happier life. Thanks for watching. If you guys like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Last, I offer a free health kit, which has my top 10 sleep tips, 1 Whole Foods plant-based recipe, and a mobility workout that you can stream on any device. That is free. There's a link down in the description for that. It also gets you signed up to my weekly newsletter that has the 3 most important things I've read, watched, and listened to within the past week. All of that completely free. If you're interested in that, link down in the description. Thanks again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. This plant dough. Whoa!